if God could use a donkey, he could use you. This morning, as some of you were in Sunday school and you listen with Deacon Council, the focus of the triumphant entrance into Jerusalem was right where it needed to be. For the focus was on the King. And I don't have a problem with giving Christ his props. But with giving Christ his props, we always also have to pay homage to the props that Christ used. It is easy, and it would have been easy, for Christ to choose any animal. It is custom that when a king goes into a city, that the king either chooses one or two animals. He either chooses a stallion or he chooses a camel. Both animals are submissive. Both animals represents royalty or splendor or the majestic of the person that's riding upon them. But I've come to find out that God is not like man, and that the things that he uses are unusual as well as unpopular. And to solidify that statement, if you look at yourself and you look at your neighbor, because of the state that we came out of, we'll find out that we were unusual, unpopular, and unattractive. But yet and still, in spite of everything, some way, somehow, God in his infinite plan finds a way to use stuff that everybody else rejects. Maybe I ain't talking to you. Maybe I'm the only one that has some stuff in my past that ought to or should have disqualified me for salvation, that it ought to disqualify me to teach or to preach or to minister the gospel of Jesus Christ. But I've come to find out God is not worried about popular people, but he's worried and he uses misfits, rejected folk that people talk about, folk that folk lie on, folk that folk reject and kick to the curb. Those are the things that God finds attractive. Now y'all can sit here and look pretty like you want, like you always been accepted in the beloved, but all of us, from the pulpit to the back door, all of us, if we really look at our life, we ought not be where we are right now. Which leads me to believe that there's some donkey in all of us. No, y'all come over here. You ain't always been obedient. You ain't always been committed. You ain't always been submitted. And if that be the case, there's some donkey. You might not look like him, but you act like him. But I'm glad that even with my donkey self, that he can still look at me and say, you know what? Just because he's an ass, I can use an ass just like him. But the whole church should have shouted right there because all of us don't have them A moments. Come. And the reason the some folk can't shout because they still having them. And Jesus now has had a long week before he gets into going into Jerusalem. One thing that Jesus had to deal with is he stopped by his daddy's house. I'm talking about the church. And there were folk in the church, but not for the right reason. So if that be the case, if Jesus goes by the church and sees folks there, is it an indication that everybody that come to church is not there for the right reason. Because he got folk in there that are doing things that is not beneficial to the kingdom, but is benefiting them. But I'm so glad that we don't have folk like that, folk that think it's all about them. That we got some real prayer warriors and some real intercessors, and we got some folk that ain't worried about money and what they doing with it and trying to call and shout. Can I tell you something? It ain't about you, boo-boo. That's all Jesus was trying to tell her. It ain't even about you. He says, my house shall be called a house of prayer. But you don't turn it into a den of thieves. And that puzzled me because I thought he was talking about money. He said, no, you don't stole people's joy. You don't stole their hope. Y'all ain't got to pray with me. He said, you don't stole their hope for the future. He said, my house ought to be a house of prayer. And when you've been delivered from being a donkey, you ought to tell another donkey, if he chose me, surely he can choose you.